McLane. Jeffrey,
Ant, what's up?
good to see you, buddy. It's been a minute.
I know it's been a little while, but we're back together.
How's the family?
Good. Yeah, can't complain.
All
Kids are
right.
getting old. How about your guys?
Same thing. Travel. We're up at Diamond Nation this weekend. So
I
the
was there
travel.
last weekend.
What's that?
I was there last weekend.
Were you really?
Yeah.
Dude, how about that? That's a drive and a half. And I'm coming from like South Jersey. So that's a drive and a half.
I know, and it's one of these places where you got to pay to see your kid. I got to pay to see my kid play ball.
Dude, that's the biggest violation that they first of all, they hose you for all the tournament fees, right? For the team itself. And then to watch your child play baseball, they want to charge you. They stick it at you all the time. My God.
I know. I mean, he struck out. He had made an error. I was like, yeah, I paid to watch my kid play horrible.
I had that same sentiment. We had to go to the you know what does that too? The Adventure, but it's by Great Adventure. That one, they charge too. And Moss had a horrible game, right? And I'm like, I had the same reaction. I had to pay to watch my kid play bad. Like there's nothing that sticks in your craw like that.
On top of the travel fees. I mean, it's getting ridiculous. This is my youngest, so I got a few more years. Well, he's 13, so I got a little more left of this. But then it's all, unless he, of course he'll go. He's going on to the majors, right?
Yeah, of course he is. It's our dream. Listen, it's the greatest. I don't care what happens. I say it all the time. I know we're joking about that stuff, but I love it every week. I love the whole sports dad thing. I live for it. I look forward to, like, when it's over, you're going to be probably going, oh my God, what am I going to do on my weekends?
Yeah, no, it's bitter. My oldest is, he's a senior in high school and he's not playing in college, maybe club ball, but this is basically the last hurrah for him. So I'm getting it's a little bittersweet. I'm getting a little emotional because he's got about a month left of baseball. And it goes quick, obviously, with our kids. We all know about that. But yeah, I do enjoy it.
Yeah, it's the best. All right, down to business. Let's go. So let's go 50,000 feet. Just the draft in its entirety. Give me your summation.
Yeah, I'm one of these guys where I don't like to grade or because we don't know, right? Ultimately, but I think on paper, what they did made sense, right? It wasn't like there were any kind of leaps of faith. Maybe a little bit with Alex Hunt in the third round, a guy that really didn't play against any good competition. And at least with the first round pick, Quinyon Mitchell at Toledo, this is a guy that could have transferred to one of the big programs if he wanted to. He answered a lot of questions at the Senior Bowl. I know Hunt was at the Senior Bowl as well, and that's kind of where he really got on the Eagles' radar. But I think for the most part, a lot of the picks made sense. You don't like to see them reach too much for need. I think you want to get playmakers, right? You want to get like studs that you can see being here for the next decade, especially with those first three picks. And, Howie shuffling the deck a lot, wheeling and dealing, and got three picks, third rounder, fourth rounder, and fifth rounder for 2025, which is supposed to be a deeper draft. And I had a feeling going into Saturday that he was going to do that because they had a bunch of picks that were too many picks and picks that were later in the draft, and apparently after the sixth round it just really fell off. So I think again, on paper, I think what Howie did made a lot of sense, but we'll have to see how this plays out, obviously.
Yeah, the Hunt pick is interesting because of the growth spurt, of the position that he starts off as a safety at Cornell and then transfers, becomes this edge guy. He's 255. He's 6'5". So, like the frame is really good. He moves. He's got hands. So he's a fascinating prospect. And I hear you on the third round. Is because that's an area where you should get, a star. You should get a starter in the third round. He's an interesting guy. Like there's a lot of things I like about him. But again, he's a project.
And how he called him developmental pick. And it kind of sounded a little – he said basically the same thing when they drafted Davion Taylor inside linebacker in 2020. And so that kind of like rung in my ear when I heard him say that. We
Yeah.
all know what happened to Davian Taylor. Just he could not play at the NFL level. And, he went to Colorado. He transferred into Colorado his last few years, but again, just didn't really play much at that position, and didn't play against great competition until the end there, and was kind of like a freelancer. And he had to come in here and really learn how to play the linebacker position. It took a few years and for them to even kind of give up on him. And, that's not fair to equate him to Hunt yet. But it did kind of ring familiar to me. And not only just Taylor, but some of the picks that Howie had made early in his tenure, where it's just like, oh, we discovered this Curtis Marsh.
Yeah.
You can go down the line. There were, look, it happens. I think Howie's overall record in the draft is solid. But some of those first few years he did that, and then the last few years we've seen him go Power 5, and especially in 2021 when they were kind of they're resetting how they did business in the draft, and they got Devontae Smith and Landon Dickerson, guys who signed extensions this offseason, so did very well there. But we still don't know about 2022 and 23. We don't know about Jordan Davis, Nolan Smith. I think Jalen Carter, we know, is going to be a quality starter, or already is a quality player. Cam Jurgens. So still kind of, uncertain about those picks and when with going Power 5 guys. So I'm not saying Howie going two small school players with two of the first 3 rounds is a bad thing, but certainly a little bit of a change and versus what he had done the 3 previous drafts.
Big story. Eagles draft, as always, brought to you by TrueMark Financial Credit Union. Check out the TrueMark Financial difference and the credit union difference, TrueMarkFinancial.com. So let's look at kind of when we look at the Arnold versus Mitchell. Like listen, I talked to a bunch of scouts, a bunch of NFL people, some coaches that dove into the draft. And, other than like Arnold played in Alabama, the only knock that I hear is that, will he put his nose in the run game? And that's it. But they love Mitchell, man.
Yeah, I had the Eagles moving up to 16 to draft him, so I can't criticize the pick. They got him at 22, right? I'd heard that they're really onto this kid and started to get a sense of it at the Senior Bowl in Mobile. I mean, they weren't the only team that liked Mitchell, and coming in, there was a lot of buzz. And then, okay, let's see how he matches up against some of these Division One, Power 5 Division One receivers, and he did very well. But yeah, I think that's going to be the question for the Eagles down the road is like, did you get the right guy? Because I think those two were pretty much unanimously considered the top 2 cornerback prospects in the draft. But Mitchell, there's a lot to like, and I think he's going to get an opportunity to win that job over James Bradbury, if Bradbury's even on the roster by the time the Eagles start playing. And, Arnold, Alabama did it there at the highest level, but he didn't have I don't want to place too much emphasis on the numbers, but Mitchell certainly ran numbers that you want out of an outside cornerback more than Arnold did.
Let's talk about DeJean because, there was a lot of talk about Cooper DeJean and they move up. I love that. I thought addressing that need, which was a clear issue last year, and getting 2 kids that you can. It reminded me of the Lito Shepherd and the Sheldon Brown, Michael Lewis here going and getting D-backs like that. What do you think about DeJean? What do you think where he projects? I had one coach tell me he could play, that he wouldn't even hesitate putting him on the outside.
Yeah, I did the same thing right when the Eagles picked him. Was call around. I talked to like 5 high-ranking personnel executives from 5 different teams, and I got mixed opinion. 3 of them said we would have given him an opportunity to play corner, but certainly see him at safety or slot. And I had 2 that told me that primarily they thought he was a safety. So there's going to be some assessment here when the Eagles get him to camp. Howie Roseman said as much. He wasn't going to pigeonhole him into one position. I did talk to somebody in the building that has pretty much an understanding of how the Eagles coaching staff views DeJean, and they're going to give him an opportunity for the outside, but I think they expect him eventually to be a middle field player, and that may come this summer. We'll see
Right.
how that pans out. The one comp that I have heard the most when it comes to DeJean, and this is a high bar, but it's Malcolm Jenkins, a guy who came in as an outside corner, played 1 year there, didn't have the foot speed to play there. They moved him to safety, became very good there, and then when he got to
Slot.
Philadelphia, because of
Yeah.
his intelligence, played as was as versatile as any defensive back. Played both safety spots in the slot, played a little bit of quasi linebacker. If you get someone who can play that many positions in DeJean, then it's a home run. And
Yeah,
do
it's
it at a
funny
high
because I thought the same thing. I thought like he's good in space, and because when that coach told me about playing on the outside, I think he was saying he's that good of an athlete. I think he fits naturally playing in space, and again as a slot corner, it works. So where do they now the off season? We had free agency. We've had the draft. There's still be some roster tweaking, but how do you assess this roster?
Yeah, typically I do kind of like a step back and look at the roster right after the draft. I didn't. I did a different story in the last day, but I think that it was a solid off season. Might if I'm look, he did well in terms of like locking up young players, and AJ we know got the extension as well. I think a lot of those moves made sense, and you're kind of getting them at what will be probably future bargains. Um, Dressed as secondary, CJ Gardner Johnson, obviously here in the draft, and running back Saquon Barkley. We know about that move as well, which I thought was made sense. It wasn't like they were breaking the bank for him. I know 12 and a half sounds a lot, but if you look at the cap now, the percentage of the money to that position, especially if you think he's a 3-down guy, is not that much, and they're
Yeah.
going to ride. They're going to ride him for these 2 years that they have him when he's in the guaranteed years of his contract. The one issue I have is at edge rusher. And, look, Josh Sweat, productive guy, but not a number one. They don't have a number one. And Hassan was your number one. And you went and got Bryce Huff, and there's a chance that you're expecting him to be number one. So there's a little bit of a projection there. And that's, you're taking a little bit of a risk there when you're projecting a guy who just did it in 1 year, whereas Hassan had done it over multiple years.
Yeah.
Now, I understand. Look, I get what happened with the Eagles moving on from him. Hassan wanted to be paid among the top 5 at his position. The Eagles didn't think that he was worth that. And they had to redo the deal anyway. They kind of boxed themselves into it going into that last year because the cap hit was so high. But I'm not blown away. You're asking a lot of guys. There's some wishing and hoping. Nolan Smith, we didn't see enough out of him as a rookie. I'm certainly not writing the story on him yet. I mean, he's young. It takes it takes some time for edge rushers to come in and be able to face against NFL tackles. So Brandon Graham's got another year under, he's his last year. He's almost 36, right? So I'm not blown away by the edge rusher position. I think that was one area that they needed to do maybe a better job. But, who knows? Huff may come in and be great as well.
No, I think that's fair. That's your biggest, I think, area of question. Like obviously with Kelsey leaving, that's always going to be a transition. But you feel like they're in good hands on the line. Everywhere else, I kind of like how it is. But I agree with you. I think the edge, you got lots of question, and of course, the middle of that line too, because of Jordan Davis and what to expect. Like you need him to not just be, I'm going to go be a run stopper and that's it.
Absolutely. And, Fletcher Cox obviously retired as well. Look, the Kelsey thing, we knew was happening. Fletcher eventually knew was going to happen. And Eagles, in both cases, prepared for it, right? They drafted Cam Jurgens and they drafted Jalen Carter. Carter and Davis kind of petered off towards the end of last year. Hey, understandable for young guys. It happens. But they got to get in NFL shape, especially Jordan Davis. And, you're looking at that draft pick. If this guy is just going to be a nose guard for a run-stopping nose guard, then I think it's an issue if you traded up for him in the first round. Like, you need a 3-down guy if you're spending that much capital on an interior defensive lineman. Now, look, he's still a fit in the scheme for Vic Fangio. Vic Fangio does a lot of odd man fronts, But when they drafted Jordan Davis, that was the question. Can this kid be a pass rusher on passing downs? And I think you saw some glimpses early last year, but by the end of the year, he was doing nothing. So yeah, I think it's fair to question the interior of the line, especially in the pass rush. Because Milton Williams, I like Milton. He's in the last year of his deal. He's a third round pick. He's kind of more of a run stopping guy than a pass rush guy. Like who else is going to move that pocket in the middle besides Jalen Carter?
So last night, I was asked a question over the weekend at one of these tournaments, and they said to me, "Hey, what really happened off the 10-1 start and then the subsequent slide? What can you make sense of as to why it just all fell off the table?" And there was it locker room issues? Was it what was it? And truthfully, I had no answer. And I'm curious, now that time has kind of gone by and you're able to reflect on it, do you have any answers as to why the slide?
Well, I did some reporting in season about things that I thought factored into the slide. And it's there's not an easy answer. There isn't a smoking gun. And I think that's what people want to know.
Yeah.
Want to think there is when something like that happens. But again, I think it was a team that post Super Bowl thought it was as good as it was the year before, and struggled to come to grips with the fact that they weren't as good. We had the replacement of both coordinators, and both those guys weren't good enough. I think the scheme, Nick Sirianni, had gotten stale. He went into the season. He told me specifically that they were going to try and hammer down on the stuff that they were great. And I know they wanted to do some things to tinker with the offense ahead of what defensive coordinators would do to stop them, but they obviously didn't do enough. I think Jalen Hurts certainly regressed. I reported this at the time. I think that when things weren't going well, he wasn't giving the locker room and the coaches a little what they need to see out of a leader in that type of situation. I think there's a lot to like about Jalen Hurts. The Eagles are committed to him financially, and it wasn't like his season was that bad. I mean, that Bills game right before the slide, he was phenomenal. He basically carried the team on his back. So he can be that guy again. And they're going to obviously address it. They obviously addressed it in firing Brian Johnson and bringing in Kellen Moore and changing the scheme. But I did a podcast episode on Kelsey to kick off our third season for Uncovering the Birds, and I basically talked to Jason throughout what I knew was going to be what I expected to be, and kind of had pretty much an idea that it was going to be his last season. So it was kind of kind of fly on the wall for Jason in the locker room, outside the locker room, at different various events, talking to him, talking to people around him, getting a sense of what his last year was going to be like. And there was one point I talked to Lee Johnson after the season, and he had told me that when Jason Kelsey was shaking his head during offensive meetings because he didn't like the game plan, you knew they were going to lose. And look, I mean, Jason isn't, that clairvoyant, but he is. And I don't think he was as much disagreeing with the stuff that Stout had in the run game, et cetera. But, and look, he's not always right as well. But I think there was a sense from team leaders that this offense just was not good enough schematically, and they weren't doing enough to help Jalen in the blitz. They weren't. Jalen wasn't playing well enough against the blitz, and it wasn't just the blitz. There were other areas that were an issue for this offense, and I think that, to me, say what you want about the defense, this team is built around offensive explosion, production, etc. Hey, just hang in there on the defensive side. I get all that, but the offense did not click, and I think a lot of that goes back to Nick Sirianni and the scheme and him. There's good stuff in that scheme. Obviously, they almost nearly won the Super Bowl the year before, but in the NFL, defensive coordinators will look at those teams and they will find out ways to beat them in the offseason, and the Eagles were not a step ahead of those defensive coordinators.
No, and it's weird because the three things that stood out was, how could there be no hot reads built in? Like, how could you just go in and not give your quarterback any answers to the blitz? How could there be no Jalen in the run game? And how come he didn't take over play calling when his OC was failing miserably?
Those are great questions, and I think if I'm going to counter the hot blitz thing, the Eagles want to be explosive. They want to throw downfield, so I think they favor that more than they do giving quarterbacks hot reads. But clearly, they needed to adapt when that wasn't working, and I think some of that falls on Kelsey, right? Who's responsible for protections and setting alignment when there are obvious blitz situations, and some of that falls on Hurts as well. I mean, he's got to be better against the blitz. To me, that's one of the huge questions going into the season. And I asked both Cam Jurgens and I asked Kelsey before the end of the season, and he agreed as well. He's like, "Yeah, is Cam going to be able to handle it, or do they want?" I think ideally you want your quarterback to handle it.
Yes.
And I asked Jalen about it, and he says he wants it. We got him last week, and he said he wants to do it. Are they going to give it to him? I think Cam can handle it, but you want your quarterback to be the maestro at the line, right? So I think that's could be a potential issue. I think Jalen has it in him, but is the scheme going to help him as well?
Yeah, I have a lot of concerns too with going back and watching all the film. Baldy and I did extensive film study on it, and there are times when he just left the pocket. He was in evacuation mode, and he needed to slide maybe a step or way too early. He dropped his eyes. Like the play itself was not good. He regressed, and that really surprised me.
And running to the side of the field where there were no receivers at times. I mean, it's
exactly.
So I think that falls a lot on the coaching and the scheme. And that's, if we just shift gears here a little bit, it's like how much of the scheme is going to be Kellen's? How much is going to be Nick's? I think there's obviously going to be some of Nick in there. He's the head coach. I mean, look, again, it's not like his scheme was terrible, as I said before, 1 year before. Now, I think Jalen bailed him a lot in 2022. And then we'll see how Kellen is a play caller. He's done it at a high level in the NFL. So, I think that the very bare minimum is going to be an upgrade over what Brian Johnson had done. Again, I'm not placing all the blame on Brian Johnson, but he had never done it really. And then certainly had never done it in the NFL. It's a different game than it is in college. And the scheme didn't help Brian, and Brian didn't help the Jalen. And so it was a combination of things on the offensive side. So they're trying to get it fixed. Let's see if it works.
So, and the last thing, Jeff, and you love your work, Jeff McLane, Inquirer. Make sure you read him, follow him on Twitter and Instagram and everywhere else, and his podcast. If the specter of Belichick, when Belichick is interviewed and says, "Hey, there's 3 teams I would go to: the Giants, the Eagles, and the Cowboys," where does that come into play? Now, obviously, for Nick, I mean, Nick knows what has to be done. It doesn't matter if it's Belichick or anybody else. It's his job to lose, right? Depending on what happens next year. But is Belichick, the specter of Belichick, is that real?
I'm laughing because, well, I mean, like, I had heard about the Belichick thing, and Eagles decided not to do it. They certainly entertained the idea. At first, I thought to myself, when I started hearing it before the end of the season, was like, do they want to hand it all over to the Bill? You got to change everything in the building, and is that going to work well for Howie? But Bill and Howie have a lot of mutual respect, so
yes,
that would have been fine at least to start. Who knows how that's going to play out?
The two of them, that wouldn't be an issue.
That at first, right? We don't know if Bill all of a sudden wants to pick the groceries.
Yeah.
Then it happens to Howie, and Bill picked the groceries every year in New England. But yeah, I mean, but they ultimately decided to stick with Nick. I think there were a combination of factors in that. And Bill's getting up there. Bill's 72. I mean, how much longer is he going to coach? Do you want to change everything in your organization? And he just only hangs around for 2 years, and maybe doesn't have a succession plan in place. Obviously, a lot of the coaches that have gone on to being head coaches under him haven't panned out as well. So maybe you don't trust Bill in that respect. But I mean, I laugh because it's just like, yeah, I mean, this is going to hang over Nick this year. I mean, he's clearly on the hot seat when you have to fire both your coordinators. and make other significant coaches changes, it's clear that the ownership and the front office wanted certain things to change. But yeah, I would not rule out Bill Belichick as a possibility if Nick Sirianni doesn't get it done here. I'd heard that Bill wants to be in the Northeast because he wants to remain close to home. That could take the Cowboys out of the equation, but they're the Cowboys as well, and I'm sure there's probably some attraction, there's some allure there, but certainly New York, he has he has the past there would make sense, and Philly because I think Jeffrey Lurie has immense respect for Bill Belichick, and as does Howie Roseman.
Yeah, great stuff, brother. Great to catch up with you, man. We'll be doing it regularly. We appreciate it, pal.
Thanks, Ant.
There he is, Jeff McLane